Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
This is the third and last encouragement talk we are going to have at this particular Rohatsu session in 2023. Tomorrow, as part of our retreat, will be a completely silent day. There will be no ceremonies, no chanting before eating, anything like that. So we have done this in the past, and people really value that, the deep silence that we come to on the advent of Shakyamuni Buddha's awakening, and in the evening of our opening the temple all night, leaving the light on and a candle burning for just to guide the path and to be with Shakyamuni Buddha. So the other two talks, for those who had not been here, I'll just recap a little bit. We spoke the first night about landscape, about the importance of landscape on our spiritual sense and our spiritual direction, our spiritual hope. I spoke about the great difficulties of this particular war on the Sinai, in the Sinai area, since the Sinai plateau, the Sinai plain is the scene, is the location, the landscape of so many of us who grew up in the Abrahamic tradition. Whether we practice those traditions or not, at this point, those are the foundation of our spiritual beginnings. And so the image, the landscape of that particular tradition plays an important role in our own innards, our own psyche. And so this is the land where the God chose to speak to Abraham, to deliver the 10 Commandments to Moses, where Jesus walked on the desert, where Muhammad walked in the desert. And so these great religions grew up in the Sinai plateau. And we just have images of that as we, throughout our lives, we resonate with it in some way. So this particular war, with all of its images that come forth to us, I think is particularly devastating to the unconscious for us. We've not always had these amazing array of terrible images that are there to see. And yet, maybe that's too bad. Maybe we would have stopped the wars earlier, but I don't know, probably not either. So the landscape then, the physical landscape that we see is also a part of us. That landscape is us, we are it, and we resonate with it. Our own landscape here is something that is more shielded by trees and forest. It's also the landscape that Ryokan-san lived in and grew up in. And so it still has an important resonance for us. And the symbolic nature of the landscape where we live is most important. And so this last night, I spoke about the inner landscape within and how we try to open to that landscape. Or maybe I could say now, to create space within ourselves. We work with opening our own landscape, being able to work with it as needed to make space around those issues that we might have that would allow us to get greater insight into the map of the mind, the map of the inner map that we have, that we each are. And I think I also said that we are so unique. We are all snowflakes. We all have different coding in our vein structure, and there are no two people alike on this whole planet. So tonight I wanted to talk about, so we had landscape and inner landscape or journey, and with whom do we travel on this journey? and what is the importance of that milieu, the people with whom we associate and work with or meet as we go along on that journey, that landscape before us, that huge landscape that opens up when we sit Zazen. I think that's truly why my first teacher would always say, that is the meaning of freedom. Because when we sit Zazen, the landscape opens, nobody's interfering, nobody's there except ourselves on the cushion in that vast landscape within that we work with as we sit, as we come to know thyself and to trust thyself, as we said last night. So in all of the heroic stories, as we're all on a heroic pathway, those with whom we meet and those whom we walk with are also central to that opening, to that space that we create that allows us to see our choices and what we might envision for our lives, what we might choose the best choice for this particular gifted body and mind that we are in, totally gifted to be human being and to have the talents and abilities that we have, all gifts, like the snow that I mentioned. The snow is free. The snow is a gift. So what do we do with that? What do we do with whom we meet? With whom do we travel? And how are we affected by those with whom we travel? And what does it mean to work in community also? So, of all of the, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, of the triple treasure, the most difficult is this one tonight, the people with whom we work, or with whom we associate. Because it's easy to talk with Buddha because Buddha is there, but Buddha doesn't really respond to us with voice or with annoyance or anything like that. And the Dharma is there also, not to argue with us, but the Sangha is there to brush up against us, to argue with us, to point out our own idiosyncrasies, whether they're useful or not. And so that's the hard part. The Buddha and Dharma are so much easier. Sangha is difficult. And of course, there are many who are walking on this path who are not engaging in Sangha at all, and they are walking a solitary path. And, that is how their life goes. For those who are Sangha members here, we happen to encounter this landscape that we are on and that we are sitting in right now, the landscape of the inner temple and the spaciousness that we try to create within this particular realm. So we did. And so it's always our choice of the degree to which we will participate or be in it. And everything, of course, is about choice. Ryokan-san was very strong on that. After all he'd been through, he came to the realization that choice was at the heart of our lives. With whom would we travel and associate? And it was in the encounter with his teacher that Ryokan-san made an overnight decision. Ryokan-san had been ordained by a priest at a very small temple in Bunsui Plain, in where he lived. And this great teacher was coming through. And Ryokan-san met him. And in some way, that teacher verified Ryokan-san's light that Ryokan-san exhibited. And so the teacher sort of penetrated that being that Ryokan-san was. And overnight, Ryokan-san made the decision that he would return to Ensuji to practice and train at Ensuji and leave behind. They actually had to walk 600 miles to get back to the temple. There weren't big trains. They were in Shinkansen at the time. And they walked everywhere they went across Japan. So they walked back, actually, I think 600 kilometers, which is more than 600 miles. So they walked back and they did it in about a week. He had a tremendously strong and demanding teacher, very, very difficult training master. And training was very hard and difficult. And so Ryokan-san joined to this community of monks to train and come forth to essentially thereafter follow a fairly solitary route, a solitary road. So Ryokan-san is one who exhibits both of those possibilities of working with the community and his teacher until his teacher died. And then he went his way. He was named, of course, the abbot of the temple. And he said, "I'm sorry, that's not for me." So he walked away, literally walked away. He just disappeared. And he disappeared for 7 years. And then his father committed suicide in the river in Kyoto. Ryokan-san learned about it, and then he returned to his homeland where he lived in a solitary way at Gogoan for many years. Essentially until he died, he lived a solitary life. But he mingled with people. He didn't just put himself away and not interact at all. He mingled with the people in the town. He begged. He lived a life of begging, and he lived in the town, interacting with people, laughing, joking, playing the game of Go, and playing with the children. And as he grew older, he was quite an intellectual, by the way. We just have these anecdotes about him, but he was quite an intellectual. And he would be invited on the weekends to go with people who had, a very nice place to live. And they also had a bath. And Ryokan-san could bathe at their home over the weekend and enjoy their food and the company of the intellectuals in the area. And then he would return to the solitude of Gogoan. But the people, with whom he interacted also fed his poetry and fed the landscape, his inner landscape, to write the poetry that he wrote. I mean, poetry comes out of our inner landscape, and it comes from our interactions and our emotional content and movement with the people around us. So the people were important to him. And you don't get to be a crazy monk out in the mountains without people knowing that you are there and taking care of you. So there's no such thing truly as being out and living totally solitary. There's no such thing, actually. Unless you are that one male person, is it Bundy, Ted Bundy? But he was ill, he was mentally ill. But Ryokan-san was not mentally ill, he was just incredibly sane in the way he chose to live. We also have had an encounter with Dogen Zenji. We have had the great fortune to come in contact with those who can teach or know about Dogen Zenji, or can translate Dogen Zenji into language we can understand. And we have had that good fortune to be with such people. So we travel then in Dogen Zenji's landscape. And we travel in everything that we do in Dogen Zenji's teaching. In our complete practice here is Dogen Zenji's teaching. So we choose to be here. We choose to practice in this way. We choose to follow the profound nature of his willingness to stand in the absolute and yet to be in the relative world and to work with the relative world. He had just as many difficulties in his formation of Ensuji, of Eiheiji. And so we get to travel with him. We get to be with his teaching. And we get to be with all the other teachers who have published works for us to be able to read, that maybe we just get one sentence out of a whole volume and we work on that sentence for a long time. It nourishes us. It feeds the forward motion of our heroic impulse as a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva is a heroic path. It's a heroic impulse. But once again, the question of spaciousness within the notion of landscape, the landscape on which we live, and the spaciousness that we create when we sit Zazen, that is created in us, is really fundamental to understand. That spaciousness includes all of the people with whom we practice. It includes actually everything we have lived. Just that traveling in just one Zazen sitting, that all that traveling that we do it's enormous. And I think we don't typically recognize it as spaciousness. Maybe it's difficulties coming up against us, and yet it is traveling in the space of space. We are space itself. And we sit Zazen, and the whole thing, our whole lives open up before us. And we have complete freedom to see our own lives, complete freedom to encounter the important and necessary things toward our own spiritual growth. Also, I have no doubt, well, I might have doubt, I know about my own life. I have often not chosen well. When my life has gone in a particular direction that might have become very painful because of a choice that was not particularly wise. But I will say that once stepping into the Dharma, as I mentioned about my making the choice to sit Zazen that morning when I was standing in my pajamas and trying to decide at 5 o'clock in the morning if I was really going to get dressed and go to the Zendo for the first time in the morning. And I did it. All against what I would ordinarily think that I would do, because as I said, I'm a night person and I much preferred to go back to bed and stay warm. But I got dressed and I went every morning after that. And it changed my life entirely. So those kinds of moments of choice, that moment of spaciousness, space opened up to me within that choice. And in that moment, when I chose to get dressed, open the door, and then open the door, and open the door, and open the door. So we have such moments. Maybe the moment you decide to marry the person you marry. It's such a big choice, such a big thing, such a terrifying thing that we make these choices. So we only have this one life. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But we learn from whatever it is we choose. I mean, maybe I could think about my own self. I made a very difficult choice in my own marriage, and yet I have 3 children and 2 grandchildren, and they provide me such a joy, and they're for their father also. So these difficult choices can be painful along that road, and then at the same time, we maybe gather enough wisdom to be able to see the purpose of it, to see the point of it all. And the point of so much suffering was to take me to the Zendo. And then we travel with the different people a different way. So I want to continue to encourage this practice of recognizing spaciousness. Dogen Zenji speaks about, spaciousness is an important teaching of Dogen Zenji. He's very clear about it, that we are space itself. Very clear about that. So that we move completely spacious spiritual bodies moving around, almost like ghosts, I think, sometimes. But it is the heroic journey. So when we sit Zazen, recognize the 3 bells ring. We are liberated. We are completely liberated. Mind is wide open. Space opens to us. We can do with it as we wish. Completely free to journey as we wish in Zazen. And even if we sit just being present without thinking at all, we are still in the landscape of space. We're not constrained in any way. So I'd open to questions tonight. We didn't have questions the first night, a little bit last night, and maybe you have a question tonight. It's our last time to talk together. If you don't, that's okay too. Yes.
I was just, when you were talking about openness, I was thinking of Viktor Frankl and how he spoke of this ultimate freedom that everyone has. And I wondered if you think it's, I don't know if you know that book, but if you think it's the same thing.
I was reading Viktor Frankl last year, I believe, and I can't remember at the moment. Tell me more what he says.
He said, wrote a book about being in the concentration camps in Europe.
Right,
and he
right.
said that no matter what anyone did to you, you still had this ultimate freedom to choose how to be.
Right, absolutely. So the story that comes to mind also is Elie Wiesel's story of being in Auschwitz. And the Jews gathered together one night and they were just beside themselves. I mean, how could you be in this situation? Here they are again. The Jews are always in this kind of situation. It's so awful. But here they are in the camps, and they decided to put God on trial because after all, they're the chosen people and God promised to protect them. And so they put God on trial and they had a jury and they found God guilty. for not protecting them and putting them into this situation. And after they finished the trial and they found God guilty, they said, now it's time for prayer. Let us finish and now let us pray. And that was that same kind of openness to possibility and the sacred which lies in that space. So we know that. We know men who have been on, in prison on death row. And there's another story. A woman who was on death row came to speak at my class. Don't remember what class I was teaching, but she came to speak, and she and her husband were both arrested for a crime that they had not committed, actually. Some guy who had been in prison with her husband came out of prison. They were driving down the road. The police pulled them over for speeding or something like that. And the guy who was sitting next to her, she was in the back seat with her two children. Her husband was driving, and the guy had a gun with him. And so he shot the policeman and then threw the gun on the floor by the driver. So when they were arrested, they were both accused then of capital punishment and both put on death row. And she had encountered meditation before. And so she was able to write letters to her husband, who was, I think, in the same prison, but she was able to write letters to him. And she said, let us sit Zazen together at the same time every day, and let us connect in this way. And so they did that. And they managed to get through. He was electrocuted and then proven innocent. And she was let go because they found that he had been, that the other guy had lied. And that other guy was in prison also, but he told another prisoner, and he was overheard saying that he was the one who actually had shot the policeman. So she was then let go from prison. But her husband was electrocuted. But they communicated then through Zazen in that way, in this space of freedom, in this spiritual practice that they could hold together to strengthen them through such tremendous difficulties. And they chose that. So it's the same kind of thing, that we have that choice. We have that ability to open, to always open. And that is the word that my first teacher, Kovenchino, uses in terms of awakening experience. Are you opened? He would always say, are you opened? So that sense of opening is the same kind of thing in which some space moves us a little bit, opens the heart, and allows us to just see a little bit more that could be useful to us and helpful in our choices, in our way to go. And I'll look back on Viktor Frankl's fantastic teacher. I just read so much this past year. I can't remember so much of it, but he is fantastic teacher. But I'll never forget the Elie Wiesel story, because that has been a story of great inspiration to me in terms of this very thing of looking at all the awful, how we've been treated in some particular way that is so severe and terrible, and then opening and allowing. That is great faith. Any other question? These talks were meant to be just encouragement talks, not big, long treatises, but just a half an hour of encouragement so that we could come together in this way and just move in our each way through the Rohatsu Sesshin with as much grace as possible and as much forward motion in our lives.